When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
The Flushing Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Oh, Mr. Sheffield, where Sean DePasquale's mic is perfectly fine. Hi, I'm Sean.
There's some backstory to that comment, but we don't need to bore you.
We don't have time. Hello, I'm Sean DePasquale. I am here with my co-host, Toria Sheffield.
Hi.
And we are here to talk about The Nanny, the TV show from the 90s starring Fran Drescher. We are on season 2, episode 8. And this episode is titled, Toria, can you say it?
Pinsky business.
Pinsky,
which I had to look up how to say. It's a Yiddish word. We'll get to it.
It's our Yiddish word of the week, and also the episode title. That's very rare that we have them both. This was an interesting episode. It had some really cool guest stars on it. We also got to see the inside of Cece's apartment for the first time.
Yep. And by the way, this is the episode where Fran has to woo a big investor by pretending to be Cece.
It's another mistaken identity episode. Strap in.
And so this episode starts off, we're in the Sheffield mansion, and Fran is giving her mother's canasta group a tour of the house. And canasta is like kind of one of those old people card games. I mean, it's not for old people, but old people often play it. A lot of times old Jewish people.
It's for old
and
people.
It's really funny because, she's like, so-and-so once sat and played on this piano, and so-and-so like once touched that vase, and these women are just oohing and awing. And then she has this line, I almost want to save it for favorite lines, but it really needs to be said. She's like, and here's the Sheffield's guest bathroom. I don't want to drop any names, but Liz Taylor did not drop white diamonds in there. It was like such a gross little joke, but like the idea that you would reveal that Liz Taylor like pooped in the bathroom with
Liz Taylor's dropping deuces in the Sheffield's guest bathroom.
It was such like an unclassy thing to say, but all the women are like, ooh.
Hey, Toria. Everybody poops, even Elizabeth Taylor.
Then, as they're all kind of oohing and awing, Mr. Sheffield walks in, and he's with huge Broadway star Ben Vereen.
I popped like the old ladies popped. I was like, oh my God, I love Ben Vereen.
He's huge star.
If you've never seen the musical Pippin, God, do yourself a favor and see the musical Pippin. I believe Ben Vereen's version of Pippin is on video somewhere. You could probably find it. Google it. Find it. It's great. He's great. He was also in Roots. He was in a million things. It's Ben Vereen. If you don't know him, then now you do. And he's fantastic always, even in this tiny, like 2-minute appearance.
Mm-hmm. And we find out that he has agreed to do Mr. Sheffield's latest production. And Mr. Sheffield said something like, oh my gosh, I've dreamed of doing this production for 20 years. I dreamed of working with you for 20 years. Now we just need to find the investors, and like this will be like the stars have aligned for all of us. So Ben Vereen, he's literally only on screen for like 30 seconds and he walks out. Clearly just, everyone.
Soft shoe, which is what he's known for. He does a soft shoe, which is what he's known for. He does a little soft shoe at the door. They're like, do you still got it? And he's like, let's see if I do. And he does it, and he's awesome. And I clapped in my home. And then he's out the door, and Fran's mom's friends, this whole group that she's with, they're like, we want to they like collect money. They have like a pot, for this card game they play. They're like, we want to invest it, our Pishke money, our Pinsky money, and they want to invest it into the play. They're like, so, and it's $25,000 in 1996-ish. And I was so curious what the inflation on that was. And I looked it up, and it's like $43,000.
Wow.
It's a considerable amount of money, now and then. Like, it's a lot of money.
Because initially, when they said they wanted to, give over their money, Mr. Sheffield was kind of like, oh, haha, we couldn't possibly, because he's thinking it's going to be, like $17. And then Cece looks at the check and she's like, $25,000? And then Mr. Sheffield's like, you will take it. So this is how we set up that Fran's mother and her friends are now like investors in this new production.
Which is kind of the only B plot in this. This is a heavy A plot episode. It's just about the thing it's about. And then there's this like very small, like, which is really, it's just like an open and a closer really, which is like they throw in money. And so now like everyone's invested, especially Fran, in making this work.
Yes. Well, because what this does is it makes Fran equally as concerned and invested in the success of this play as Mr. Sheffield, which is what, is the engine for her motivation later for a big, twist that happens. And so basically, we cut to a few days later and Mr. Sheffield is about to welcome a very, very big deal investor into the house, this guy named Charles Hayes. He's actually like a career garbage, like waste management man by trade, like runs like garbage facilities, but he has started to invest heavily in Broadway shows. And Mr. Sheffield is very, very agitated and nervous. And he reveals that, like basically if he doesn't get this money, this production can't happen. And Fran's like, well, what do you mean it can't happen? Like, what's going to happen to my mom's money? And he's like, well, your mother must have known that investing in theater is risky. And Fran's like, no, we had no idea. You said this was a sure thing. And he has a line that actually made me laugh out loud where he said something like, oh, it's because, I found that saying, throwing your money into a rat trap and theater is dying doesn't work as well. So basically, like, Fran gets really
all right, but hold on, before we get too far away, we should pause and acknowledge Charles Hayes is played.
I was gonna get there.
You introduced the character.
No, but he didn't walk in yet. They're talking about him. But okay, so Fran is now very freaked out and she's like, oh my God, like, yeah, this investor better give you his money or like my mom's going to lose all her money. And then Cece walks in and it's raining outside and, because this meeting's about to happen. And Cece's literally like, oh, like, I can't wait for this meeting. I'm on fire today. A tourist tried to steal a cab from me. And like, I literally kneed him in the groin and hit him with my umbrella. And she's very proud of this. And then she like looks at her hair in the mirror and she's like, oh God, like I got to fix myself up before Charles Hayes gets here. And Mr. Sheffield's like, yes, please do, Cece. Like it's rumored that this guy fancies himself a ladies' man, and I'm sort of depending on you to really cinch the deal. And that's when, so Cece goes into the bathroom to clean herself up. That's when Charles Hayes arrives, played by none other than Wallace Shawn.
Yes, is not only a brilliant actor, but also a playwright as well. And it is inconceivable that he's not one of the best performers of his generation. The great Wallace Shawn, you probably know him best from Princess Bride. If his little squishy eyes and bald head and like face and voice sounded familiar, it's probably from Princess Bride. That's what most people I think know him at this point.
He was also in Clueless.
Yes, yes.
But yes, he's very famous for Inconceivable.
I love Wallace Shawn. I think he's also his last name Shawn spelled correctly.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. But it's not disappointing for real, but then slightly disappointing that he plays such a skeezy little character, even though he does it really well. He's great as the actor, but basically he's like he doesn't just fancy himself a ladies' man. Like this guy's like gross. Like at one point, which I should say, he comes in and he's like totally flustered and he's like, I've had the worst day. I tried to get into a cab and some tall blonde woman kicked me in the groin and hit me with her umbrella. And there's just this look of like abject horror on Mr. Sheffield and Niles and Fran's face because they're like, oh my God, Cece like assaulted the big investor. No sooner does that happen do we hear Cece coming out of the bathroom and Niles literally pushes her face back pushes her by the face, which is
he shoves her by the face back into the bathroom.
A face push is the most demeaning kind of push. And throws her umbrella in with her and locks the door.
And then slams and locks her in the bathroom.
And then, this Charles Hayes types he's like, well, good to meet you, Maxwell, but where's this Cece Babcock? And Mr. Sheffield's like, I was thinking we'd keep it, just the boys today. And Wallace Shawn literally says, no chick, no check, no deal. It's just like, ew. Oh my God. So gross. So gross. But hey, this was the reality of the industry. And so no sooner does he say that, does Fran appear. And she's like, why, hello, I'm
She first appears by sticking one leg. She I love this bit. I thought it was really funny. She sticks her leg out around the side of the wall and sort of sexily extends it down to the ground, and then comes in the room and goes, "Oh my! I think I have a run in my stocking."
Yes. Well, it's because she had just because right after
she overheard Hayes talking about how much she likes legs.
And then we cut to this little quick scene in Mr. Sheffield's office where Cece is now back there. And it's like Cece, Mr. Sheffield, Niles, and Fran. And they're kind of trying to quickly come up with a plan to make this work because the investor is still out in the living room. And, Cece's like, this will never work. Nanny Fine could never pretend to be me. Like, she's not of my class. She's not of my breeding. And then Niles says something like, oh, good, maybe she won't lick herself in front of company. Like, just some horrible joke. And Mr. Sheffield.
A whole run of dog metaphor jokes. In that scene, it's an entire scene basically where they're just comparing Cece to a dog, line after line after line. I couldn't even write them all so fast.
It is so emotionally abusive. This is such a toxic relationship. It is so
terrible.
Awful.
And these three people are just beating up poor Cece, and then they shove her outside into the ring.
Yes,
an actual dog.
To be fair, though, this would not have happened had Cece not been a horrible human being. She kneed a man in the groin and hit him so she could get his cab.
In the ring.
Although I guess you could argue that's also classic New Yorker. She said, tourist trying to steal my cab. Not on my watch.
I didn't until the guy walks in and is and okay, look, he's a horrible human being. They established very early on he's a terrible person. He's a gross worm of a man. He's a fucking a misogynistic grosso.
Yeah, but Cece doesn't know that.
And he's trying to steal her cab, which tracks with this character who was probably look out, dame, I need to steal your cab. Inconceivable. So I feel when she first tells the story, I was like, good for Cece. So no one should steal your cab out from under you in the rain. Also, it's hey, dude, maybe let the lady stuck in the rain have the cab. Be a little gentlemanly. You know what I mean? Show some class. And so then when the guy shows up, you're like, oh, this is a classless guy. He sucks. So I thought might be Team Cece in this episode.
Okay, fair. You've convinced me. Point to Sean. So. Wait, okay, where are we now? I'm like, okay, what?
So basically,
I know where we are.
Yeah, so basically Fran is pretending to be Cece for all of these circumstances. Fran's very invested because her mother's money and all her mom's friends' money is invested in this thing. And so she's going to try to make this work. And she basically is well, I have to keep pretending to be Cece. They lock Cece out of the room where they're discussing this, Mr. Sheffield and Fran and Niles for some reason, who's always part of these very important discussions, even though he's literally the butler, but it's adorable. Niles had some of the best scenes and moments and lines in this episode. I wrote down, I want more Niles episodes. So I'm not complaining. It's just funny to me. And then basically they decide dude, you have to go out on a date with this guy and be Cece.
Because Sean Wallace basically says yes, I have the check ready and, ready to give over, but I won't do it until you have dinner with me, Miss Babcock. Like, you're so charming. And he's basically like, I'll pick you up at 8 at your place. So it's also set up that, the money hinges on Fran slash Cece going out with him. And they decide they'll do it because they all care deeply about this play. Yes, Cece. And the best part is, so Cece, who has been locked out in the rain, so she's out there. They go back out into the living room, and as they leave, Mr. Sheffield's like, "Niles, aren't you forgetting something?" And he's like, "Quite right, sir." He goes back into the office. A freezing Cece is out, literally soaked to the bone in the rain. She's knocking on the door, and he just goes in and turns off the lamp and then walks out. Oh, it's so mean. But so then we cut to Fran arriving at Cece's apartment. I'm leaving out some smaller parts, but basically she arrives at Cece's apartment the next evening, ready to pretend to be Cece. And this is when we first see Cece's apartment, which is very Patrick Bateman-esque. Very minimal, cold.
Yes, it is very Patrick Bateman-esque, but that's also that was like the 90s definition of like successful business person, was like that was the decor at the time for like successful, was like sleek, cold, minimalist.
Fran even is like looking at Cece's photos, and she's like, "This guy's handsome. Like, who's he?" And Cece's very coy about it, and then she reveals that it was just the guy that came in the frame. But so
it was sad. This was one of the first episodes where I was like, "Oh, I feel so bad for Cece. Her life is very, very lonely and very depressing." And this episode just like continues to point that out over and over and over again.
It's so sad. Poor Cece.
It's so sad. And the way she admits that to Fran, where she's like, "Oh, he's handsome," and then Cece just goes, "It came with the frame." Like, she just sadly admits it.
And she also has just swigged a shot in like a shot of whiskey, and she puts her finger around the rim, almost as if it's whipped cream, to get the very last straws. But she said, such a sad, lonely, functioning alcoholic lady, probably. But so then Sean Wallace gets there, so Cece runs into the closet to hide. And, Fran sort of greets him and pretends it's her space and all of that. And she actually takes him in, he brings her flowers. So she takes him back into the kitchen to put the flowers in a vase. And when she does that, Mr. Sheffield bursts in. And Cece comes out of the closet and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Oh, I've decided, like, no, we can't go through with this. Like, nothing is worth this." Because, in his mind, he's thinking, "Oh, Miss Fine's going to have to potentially, like, sleep with this man. Like, I can't do this. I actually can't go through with it." But then Cece goes, because while Cece was in the closet, but before Mr. Sheffield got there, Wallace Shawn had said something like, "I'm thinking I might even invest $1 million in this play." So he had said that before they go off into the kitchen. So right up Mr. Sheffield's like, "We can't go through with this." Cece's like, "He's up to $1 million." And Mr. Sheffield's like, "Get in the closet." And then they both run into the closet and are hiding, at which point Wallace Shawn and Fran come out back into the living room and they sit down. And this is where this character, he basically is like, Miss Babcock, I've been thinking, let's ditch Mr. Sheffield and make this a duet.
Yeah.
And Fran's like, "What?" And he's like, "You said it yourself on the phone. He's just a pretty face in a blazer. Like, you're the brains of this operation." And Fran's like, "I said what?" And Mr. Sheffield is like, so outraged. And Cece is also like, she's totally been caught. And what did she say? She was like, no, I said you're a trailblazer.
Yeah.
I said you're great and a trailblazer. And he's like, "Come on, like, we'll do this ourselves and we'll cut Sheffield out." And Fran, who is completely loyal and has a lot of integrity, she literally stands up and she's like, she was like, I would never, because, you know, Mr. Sheffield is a man of integrity. And when he believes in a play, he sticks to it. And, you know, he will wait 20 years to mount a production. And then she goes, meanwhile, I, Cece Babcock, would mount just about anything. And it's this big moment, you know, where she's going to defend Mr. Sheffield. Yeah. And then he comes out of the closet, opens the front door, and pushes Wallace Shawn out.
Charles Hayes, yeah.
And he's basically like
of two very hard shoves in this episode.
yes. And he's like, Sheffield, like, what are you doing here? And Mr. Sheffield goes, taking out the trash, throws his coat in his face and slams the door. And, you know, the audience is like, woo, and clapping. And it's this big fun moment. Cece desperately goes running after him. But you know, then, you know, Fran is like, oh my goodness, like, Mr. Sheffield, like you were here, you came here because you were worried about me. And he kind of like shrugs sheepishly. And yes, very much. But then there was this kind of, she was like, you were peeping through the keyhole because you were worried about me. And then she's like, you don't do that at home, do you? Did you notice his face kind of was non-committal?
Yes, that's how they end the last line of the episode is him being like, maybe I do.
I don't know if that was the intention for that look, but I definitely clocked it. I was like, Mr. Sheffield, are you peeping through her bedroom or bathroom?
It was sort of implied that, like, yeah, you know, listen, in like a cute kind of
in a cute way. English way.
Yeah, in a cute way.
And then like the real end of the episode is they're back it's like the next day, they're back at the Sheffield house, and Fran is saying how she is so terrified to tell her mother that, like, you know, this play is not going to actually get produced because the investor fell through. And so Sylvia shows up and Fran's about to tell her, but then Mr. Sheffield comes in and is like, oh, I've got some news. I found a new investor for my production, me. And that's kind of a big deal because it was also noted earlier in the episode that he never invests his own money in productions. Like, he kind of considers it like bad form, or just not something he's ever done before. But he's basically like, you know, I've decided to go out on a limb because I heard that this play was directed by is being produced by a man of integrity.
Yeah. And
he kind of looks at Fran, and it's kind of actually nice because it's almost like, nice you know, she believes in him. So he now believes more in himself. And then he says to Sylvia, he's like, oh, and you would have been so proud of your daughter, Sylvia. You know, she turned down a millionaire for me.
And Sylvia goes, oh, Fran, did you think I'd be upset by that? I'm not upset by that. And then she very calmly walks over to where Niles is cleaning the stove.
The oven.
And very calmly looks at him, and as she opens the oven door, she goes, is this gas? And then just sticks her entire head in.
She's going to put her head in an oven.
She's gonna put, which is an old Yiddish Jewish mother thing that my mother used to say it. Oh, if you ever do this, I'll stick my head in the oven, you know?
Oh, yeah. And it's very, very dark. Basically, you know, gas ovens used to be the norm, and that used to be a way that a lot of times people would kill themselves, and often dissatisfied housewives. That was sort of the trope. But hey, very funny in this context. I'm not gonna lie. I'd be a liar if I said
it's funny because of how it speaks to Jewish culture. For me, it's like it was like, oh yeah, I've heard that joke. My mom never went as far as sticking her head in an oven, but I would argue that maybe my great grandmother did.
just to see how, just to flirt with the danger of how it would feel.
For this exact reason, just for the threat of like, I will stick my head in this oven.
Yep.
When I was a kid, I didn't understand. I grew up in Florida. Everything was electric. We didn't even have gas. So I didn't understand what that even meant. And I thought my mom was threatening to set herself on fire.
Or like bake herself slowly.
Yes. It was a far more horrific proposition than like slowly gassing herself. So as a child, that always terrified me, that threat.
Anyway. It's like, I'll microwave my face.
It's like, I will set my head on fire and slowly melt in front of you.
So
Plus, you couple that with like the Hansel and Gretel story, and they throw the lady in the oven, and she burns to death. So I thought that was what the thread was. Is I will burn myself to death in this oven.
True. Much more dramatic way to go.
Yeah.
Should we move on to segments?
We should move on to segments.
And now, segments.
So, segments.
Yeah, no, I think we should move on to segments.
We can move on to our segments.
And now, segments.
Segments with Sean and Toria. Okay, favorite moments lines. One of my favorites right off the bat that cracked me up is when they see Ben Vereen, they're like, oh, and Fran just goes, do roots. as if there's like one line or one joke that he could say that would, encapsulate all of the classic dramatic miniseries Roots.
She does the same thing. She also then she goes, do Pippin. It's like, what does that mean? Like, sing a song? Like, it's great. It's great. Great line. What else you got?
When Fran finds out that the production is going to open in Philly, she goes, oh, my Aunt Sally lives in Philly. She's the one with the miracle ear. And Niles is like, so like she has a hearing aid? And Fran goes, no, when you look inside, you can see the Virgin Mary. That I loved that waste management leg joke where
by the way, for our younger listeners, that joke only works because there used to be a product called Miracle Ear, which was like a hearing aid type device.
Yes. I kind of think you can infer it from the context. But you don't know. I don't know. Younger listeners, did you infer it from the context?
Yes.
Tell us.
So in one of the smaller scenes that we sort of skipped over, there's like a brief interstitial between Fran going to Cece's apartment and Fran agreeing to go to Cece's apartment, where she's at home getting ready for this date, and Brighton sort of gives her a hard time about like lying, like he sort of calls her out on like, oh, so you're pretending to be an actor or whatever, And her response to you're pretending to be an actor is Fran goes, no, that's Steven Seagal, which I was like, wow, great line. I mean, first of all, he was actually popular.
Did she say Steven Seagal or Sylvester Stallone?
Steven Seagal. I wrote it down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Steven Seagal, which is, look, Sylvester Stallone's a good actor. Steven Seagal never was, is now like a joke, like a weird kind of like just meme. So it was a great bit. I really like that bit. And then my other favorite line is she's pretending to be Cece, and she's looking for a business card in Cece's purse to get Cece's address and give it to Wallace Shawn's character. And she goes, oh, what's this? And she goes, it's just a bill from my shrink. Whoa, am I unhappy?
Yep. Really, really good line.
Yeah. Which then portends itself to be true when we find that Cece's like using the picture that comes in frames just to like fill up her apartment with like good looking people.
Yeah. And I had that line. I also really liked the kids are playing cards, and they're playing cards, and one of them goes, what do you have if you have 4 queens? And Niles goes, gather around the piano and sing Gypsy. Or no, she goes, what do you do if you have 4 queens? Gather around the piano and sing Gypsy, which is just, again, a very Broadway show tunes. I think another thing that I would have probably clocked as offensive a couple months ago, but now I'm like, oh, I bet you a lot of gay men at the time were laughing very loud. I also
so we talked about there's that whole run of dog metaphors. And I found it, and it's funny. It is, I mean, you shouldn't compare women to dogs. Let's just get that out of the way. You really shouldn't.
But it's not great. Hey, it's not all women. It's just Cece.
Well, and to be fair, in looking back over the exact exchange, she starts it by saying, she goes, Maxwell, Nanny Fine can't possibly pass for me. She isn't in my class. She doesn't have my breeding. So she starts out by like kind of getting them into a dog metaphor by talking about class and breeding, which she's also talking about high society and all of this stuff. But, class and breeding, it sounds like dogs. And then Niles goes, yes, then perhaps she won't lick herself in front of company. And Cece goes, Maxwell, are you going to let him talk to me like that? And Maxwell, who's mad that she hit the investor, he goes, yes, you hit our investor. That's bad, Cece. Very bad. And then she's like, Maxwell. And he goes, sit. And she sits on the edge of the desk, And then
Yes.
Fran says, is he going to hit her with a rolled up newspaper? And everyone has like a laugh.
Yes.
I mean, look, great like play of words and like brilliant like exchange of like keeping the joke in the metaphor for, what was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like eight lines. It's a great exchange. So I mean, I thought it was very funny,
It was really good writing. Yeah. I mean, and then even a little later in this episode, when Fran is like, well, I'm off to pretend to be Cece Babcock. And she's like, Niles, throw something at me to help me get into character, basically like insult me. And we have this great, it's almost like an improv game where he's like, oh, I couldn't possibly. And she's like, oh, of course you can. I'm Cece Babcock off to work. And then without even skipping a beat, he goes, your usual corner. And then she's like, great. And she's like, okay, here's another one. I'm Cece Babcock about to get money from a man. And, he says something else horribly insulting. And it literally
ends. Don't forget your change belt. And then he goes, oh God. Like,
and he's like, okay, one more. And she's like, okay. She's like, I'll make it easy. Hey, Niles, got a drink? I'm thirsty as a dog. And this is where he fumbles and he's like, oh, dog, drink. And she's like, Niles, you've disappointed me. And she leaves, at which point he goes, wait, no. And he throws open the door and he yells, I'll leave the toilet bowl open. So they've kind of gotten like almost slightly meta with how hard Niles works to burn Cece all the time.
Let's talk about IMDb comments for a minute here. Let's dive back into the erroneous goofs found in the nanny that don't actually exist. So this week we have errors in geography, and this contributor, 0 of 4 people found this interesting, by the way. The person writes, when Fran mistakenly thinks Cece came out as gay, she tells her, now you and your special friend can dance together at Disneyland. This is telling, as the show was shot in Los Angeles, which is near Disneyland. Well, it's set in New York, which is much closer to Disney World in Florida. And it's like,
shut up.
That's not an error. 1 million more people know Disneyland as a term more than they know the distinction of Disney World. I grew up in Florida and went to Disney World, and guess what? Called it Disneyland all the time because that was the thing that was marketed out. That was the reference that was made in every piece of like entertainment that I consumed.
Because
like Disneyland.
The line is, we're going to Disneyland.
Yes. And this show wasn't just written for people that live on the East Coast that are more familiar with the term Disney, like with the distinction of Disney World. Like Disneyland is what is universally known. Like,
these are just the incels of IMDb. Like, I just can't
leave people. It's just like it's not. It wasn't an error. Don't attack the writers or things that aren't actually errors. I would expect in goofs to have things that are like continuity mistakes, things that we've actually pointed out that aren't usually mentioned in the goofs on IMDb. Instead, you get junk like this. Anyway, that's my time.
He'll be here all week, people.
You're all idiots.
Well, the nanny trivia fits in well since we were talking about how much we loved Niles this episode. So last week I talked about that video I saw that talked a lot about the casting process for this show. And Daniel Davies, who played Niles, when he auditioned, they loved him, but their concern was that he was too young because they initially conceived of the butler as being an older, more like father-like age.
Dude, that explains that first season line about like, him being there throughout all of Mr. Sheffield's life that they then had to retcon into like, well, we were both kids together, I guess.
Yes, I literally wrote, you can see the adjustments, how he became the butler's son, not the butler, to justify how he's been in this man's life since birth.
Amazing.
But it kind of does make sense because when you're sort of putting the puzzle pieces together of everybody in this show, you would be like, oh yeah, and there'll be this butler who's almost like a father type age to Mr. Sheffield, and he can be sort of dry and adds to the mix in this certain way. But then they sort of made him a man very close to Mr. Sheffield's age. So
I actually think it worked in their favor. I think if this was supposed to be this like 90-year-old butler who was super seasoned and professional and had been his butler, had been his father's butler and was still alive all these years later. I think both his like razor sharp wit would have been harder to buy. And I think the familiarity would have also been harder. Like it's already kind of hard to buy sometimes, but I think it actually would have been even harder if he was supposed to be this like older man who had been raised in this environment and had been like professional his entire life. And like now all of a sudden he's like super lax. I actually think it's more believable that like, oh, they were like the same age,
Yeah,
so of course he just like talks to Mr. Sheffield like, like they're pals.
Yes, and the rapport that Fran and Niles have as two very sassy, salty people,
Yeah.
it would have been impossible. So I totally agree. It's one of those I think like little like magic things that you can't like account for that ends up making like really really working. And then we kind of we already went over the Yiddish phrase, which is Pishke. I think we are. Maybe I'm giving you too much credit, but I think we're both the Frans because I think we're both pretty loyal and like I would never ever be able to go behind someone's back and like work out a better deal for myself, even if it was the best business decision for me. Like I do not have that killer instinct.
Same.
I just it makes me feel so awful. I've talked about this a million times. Like, yeah, even if it's like the better job paying me more money, if I feel like someone kind of, really like did something for me early on or has treated me pretty well, or, I can't. I would rather have less money and not feel gross.
Same. And that's why we're both doing a podcast for basically free. I guess from that perspective, we're both the Fran, but I don't know, man. I felt real bad for Cece this episode. I wanted to side with this, be the Cece.
But not because you are the Cece.
No, you're right. I have empathy like Fran. All right. Well, that's an episode.
Mm-hmm.
If you liked it, tell us about it. Leave a positive 5-star review on Apple Podcasts because that super helps the show a lot. It helps other people find the show. And we are now competing in a very cutthroat nanny podcast industry with like 4 other nanny podcasts. I won't say their names. If you feel like you need more nanny podcasts in your life, I guess go try out the competition. But you're not going to get Sean and Toria. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, some people like butter, some people like margarine. Right. What are we going to do about it?
And the margarine people are wrong. You can find us on social media at Oh Mr. Chef Pod. That's with 2 F's, no Y. Oh Mr. Chef Pod. That's on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me on Twitter at Sean Wrights. And Toria, where can people find you?
Instagram, Toria Sheffy, 2 F's and a Y.
Toria Sheffy, 2 F's and a Y. And we'll be back next week with episode 9 of season 2. We're flying through these, just barreling through.
Yeah, too fast. It's growing up too fast.
All right. Bye, Toria.
Bye.
The Flashing Girl from Flushing. The nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.